Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar from Upad on how tenants are looking online for their next rental and how to get your property to stand out. We are doing this to the customers of Property Investor Project, and I've got the Landlord blogger with me this evening. Good evening to you.
Good evening. Hello everyone.
So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk to your base. Obviously there's been a few posts and so on that we've done through Property Investor Project and various articles about Upad and just insights on how to let your property. So hopefully this will be a useful webinar that will cover off a few things. For those of you who don't know me, my name is James Davis. I've been a landlord for the last 16 years. I've got properties in northwest London and in Swansea, and it was off the back of that that I wanted to launch a new business for landlords, as I found it frustrating using your traditional high street agent and Gumtree and sort of other classified sites to find your next rental. I actively wanted to do the viewings myself. I had my own tenancy agreement, but you still had to pay for everything if you were using a high street agent. And I just found the quality of inquiries you got from your traditional sort of Gumtrees and classifieds wasn't particularly great, and there had to be a better way of doing it. So it was off the back of that that we launched Upad. And we're now doing a series of seminars and webinars for landlords around the UK off the back of the amount of business that we have done. And in the last 12 months we've let just over 9,500 properties, which interestingly has generated just over 250,000 tenant inquiries. And this is really interesting because it gives us a lot of insights into tenant behaviour, what sites tenants are looking on for their next rental, what time of day, what devices, and what will make your property stand out and let faster than it otherwise would be. And hopefully we can share some of those insights to you that will be beneficial within your rental business. So in the next 25 minutes or so, what we are planning to cover off is how to set the right rental price for your property, understand the marketplace that you operate in, how competitive it is, and again how you have to create standout against other people that are advertising a property in your area, create the perfect property ad, what will make it really stand out against all the others that are on the market, and maximize the amount of inquiries that you get. There is this correlation that the more inquiries you get for your rental property, the shorter any void period will be, and therefore it's quite an important thing to look at. And finally, how to choose the perfect tenant for your property. Somebody hopefully is going to stay for a long period of time, treat it with respect, and pay the rent on time, of course. But just before I go into that, given that we are doing this webinar for Property Investor Project, and there's obviously a few other online agents that are mentioned on there. I just wanted to talk briefly through what is an online agent, as it's a phenomenon, a fairly new thing, where traditionally us as landlords have had to use classifieds, Gumtree, and your traditional high street agent in the past. And the things I think are worth sort of covering off are to do your own due diligence before you choose whichever agent you're going to do, and maybe take the mindset of being a tenant. Maybe inquire through Rightmove or Zoopla as a tenant to see how quickly they reply to inquiries. If you Google Rightmove, Upad or any other agent, it will bring up their listings on Rightmove. Inquire through their application form. There's a form to fill out there, and also call them and just see how quickly they come back to you, because it's really important. What we're finding now is tenants are looking for their next rental within a 30 to 60 minute window, and so if they reply back maybe 5 hours or indeed the next day, there's a really big opportunity that's being missed there. So if you take the mindset of being a tenant, inquire maybe in the evening, this sort of time of night, and also on the weekend, and see how quickly they reply back to you. And the reason I mention this is at Upad we get about 40% of all of our inquiries from outside of normal office hours, which is a huge amount of leads that you could otherwise be missing if somebody only operates between your traditional 9 to 5. Clearly there is a high cost saving too. My belief is that the idea of having a high street presence and vehicles isn't something that is needed in the rental space. It's very much a sort of a commodity purchase. And what I mean by that is tenants are increasingly looking only online for their next rental. they are only meeting the landlord or the agent at the physical property. And so the idea that you're paying for flashy offices and vehicles is something that isn't relevant within the letting space, but those costs are being bared by us as landlords and isn't particularly relevant. The third point is that it's important that whoever you choose to use is open 24/7. This is very much, as I just said, that a lot of tenants are inquiring outside of your normal office hours. And indeed, you as a landlord, what we find is most landlords are doing their landlord business outside of normal office hours. They have a day job and doing this in the evenings and the weekends and as and when they have time during the week. So try and find somebody that will deal with inquiries and help you outside of traditional office hours, because increasingly that's when tenants are looking, and it's also at the times when you need help and support. And it's sort of a given that most viewings will occur outside of normal office hours because that's when people are working. So the idea that somebody you're using works 24/7 is very important. Certainly at UPAD, the guys are in the office to help you between 8 and 8 during the week and 9 to 4 on the weekends, and 24 hours a day for tenants in terms of answering the phone and dealing with email inquiries. And then I sort of alluded to this earlier, and we'll come on to it in a minute, but speed is so much more important today than ever before. The idea that people are spending a long period of time looking for their next rental is very much something from sort of 5 years ago. And today people are inquiring generally in the evenings and the weekends. They want to get 3 or 4 viewings in their diary for the next few days and then make a decision. And so the lettings process has gone from being a 2-3 month journey to sort of 1 or 2 weeks. Increasingly, we're finding tenants going through the whole journey within sort of 48 hours. I think one of the fastest we had was actually today, where late morning 3 tenants accepted a property that they had seen, and we went through the whole referencing process, taking rent monies, deposit, getting the tenancy agreements all done before about 4 o'clock this afternoon. So speed is very much order of the day, and that also matters to us as landlords when we're getting inquiries from tenants to reply back to them speedily rather than wait the next day. And finally, I think it's just worth reflecting on what do you want from an agent? What support do you need? Is it just to find a tenant and get your property on Rightmove and Zoopla, which, you know, 4 or 5 years ago you had to use a traditional agent to access those sites? Do you need your hand held throughout the whole process and somebody to deal with it from cradle to grave? Maybe your property is the other end of the country. So depending on what you're wanting from an agent, you now have a choice rather than having to use a traditional agent or using sites like Gumtree and Classified. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview about what an online agent is. Certainly the Landlord has a huge amount of content online about why online agents have a big role to play in the letting space, rather than just being forced to use a traditional high street agent. Is there something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to jump in here at this point and say the price difference for me personally. I've been using online letting agents for the last 3-4 years, and for a property that I think a letting agent charged me £700 just to find me a tenant, and this wasn't a managed service, it was a percentage based on the rented income. I got the same service from a letting agent and they charged me £50. So there's a massive difference there, £650. And if you've got multiple properties and you've got a higher tenant turnover, which you shouldn't, but if you do, you can see how quickly that money can be saved. So I think that price differentiation is very, very important and something to think about, and it's a big reason why I use online letting agents.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. One thing as a statistic is that for the average landlord who uses an agent, half their net profit goes on using a high street agent, which is a huge amount when you consider what's actually being involved. So clearly I set up UPAD on the back of exactly what was just said. So hopefully that gives you an overview of what is an online agent. There's far more content on his site that is there, so go and check that out afterwards. So the agenda, the first thing that we said we were going to talk through was about setting the right rental price. And one of the most useful things that we've found is creating a property alert. And I think these are really useful tools for landlords. And just before I go into it, it'd just be interesting to know from everybody that is listening, and we've got, let's just have a quick look here, sort of 362 people that are taking part, whether you have an alert set up or not. So if you could just answer one of the questions on the poll of whether you have an alert set up on Rightmove or Zoopla, just select yes or no, that would be much appreciated. For those that don't, I'll just briefly explain in a second, but the functionality is pretty much the same whether it's Rightmove or Zoopla, but there's a huge value add as to why you should do it. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to select yes or no to one of those options, and thank you very much for taking part. So we've got 60-something% of you that haven't and 40 that, that do. Which interesting. I was in Nottingham last night, and there was only like 1 or 2 people out of 150 odd people I was presenting to that had an alert set up. So clearly there's a big variance between geography and sort of bases, as it were. But just to sort of walk you through what I mean by this and how to set up an alert. The reason why you would set up an alert is to keep yourself informed of properties that come up in your locality that are very similar to yours. And these were originally designed more for buyers and tenants to be kept informed of properties as soon as they came on the market, so they could be sort of first ones in, as it were, to inquire and hopefully secure it, as speed is increasingly becoming the case. So how you set up a property alert is you go on Rightmove or Zoopla, you put in your postcode, a number of bedrooms, etc., and just underneath that there's a button that says create an alert. And you put your email address in, and as and when new properties that come up that match your criteria, you get an email through, similar to what you can see on the screen now, for properties that match your the same sort of criteria that your property is in. Clearly, if you've got half a dozen properties and they're quite different in terms of geography and sizes, it's worth creating half a dozen different alerts rather than just having one. But when you get these through into your inbox, and I think the settings are daily, every 3 days, or once a week, and you can choose how frequently you want to get them. But there's quite several reasons, I suppose, as to why I'm a believer that these are really important. The first, and probably the most important, is to give you a steer on how competitive the space is that you operate in. And if you're getting maybe 20, 30, or even 40 other properties that match your search criteria, there's a huge amount of competition in your marketplace, which means you've got to go the extra mile to make yours stand out compared to all other properties in that locality. If there's only 1 or 2, it probably means you don't have to work quite so hard to make it stand out compared to all the others, because there's less choice from a tenant's perspective. The second quite important point too is how are other properties being presented online, and one of the key things, and we'll come on to this shortly, is photography. Are other people got really good snazzy photographs, internal shots of the property that just make it really interesting and will make people inquire? Or have other people got no photographs, or are they very poor quality ones? And it will give you a steer about what you need to do to make your property stand out compared to all others in the marketplace. The third one is, where does your property appear in a search result? And the reason I put this up here is on Rightmove and Zoopla, when you do a search, there's 10 properties per page of results. And so if there's 30 or 40 properties that are in the same locality as yours, same size and same price range, you need to work out how to get your property onto that first page of results. It's a bit like Google. It's rare that we ever go off the first page of result of Google, and so therefore we need to do a similar thing from a landlord's perspective to work out how we can get our property on that first page of results. And the fourth one, which is really important, is what's happening to rental prices in your area. You know, there's enough statistics and stuff within the news about rents going up last year on average about 5% across the UK. But what is happening in your locality? If you have a 2-bed in Acton, what is happening for you will be very different to the national picture, indeed what is happening just within London. And by creating alerts through, what it means is at the time that you are going to let your property, you know what you need to do to make it stand out compared to all the others and what price you should put it on, so that at that moment you know what you need to do to make it stand out over all others, rather than just repeating what you've been doing previously. If you're not aware of what the competition are doing, how can you make yours stand out more than what other people are doing. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any queries or questions, we're very happy to do a Q&A at the end. And on the box that is on your right-hand side, there is one of the options there is a chat box, and you can put questions to us, which I will answer as many as I can at the end of this webinar. So please do use that, and we will come visit all the Q&As at the end of the session. So please do raise anything if you want it discussed in a short while. So setting the right rental price. This is, we talked about creating an alert, so you understand what you should set the price at. There's one other consideration here, and this is the fact that pricing is probably less important than it used to be, for the reason that the portals, in particular Rightmove, have changed how their search functionality operates. And what I mean by that is previously, I think this was before February this year, when you did a search for a property between, say, £400 and £600 per week, those properties that were 600 appear at the top of the page, and those that were on 400 were on page 3, page 4, for example. And now what they do is they show the most recently advertised property at the top of the list rather than the most expensive. So what you can see here on the top right-hand corner is a tab box that says most recent. And you can actually change it so that it shows the most expensive or the cheapest, a bit like you could with Amazon and other sites. But first of all, we know from Rightmove that very few tenants ever even know that option exists, and most don't change it that even are aware of it all. So about 95% of all tenants just leave it as is, and therefore getting your property looking as stunning as you possibly can as soon as you advertise it is really important. Now, I would be the first to hold my hand up and say previously, if I had enough notice before my tenants were moving out, I might put it on at a cheeky price, maybe a bit more than what I think I could actually reasonably get, just to see if there was interest out there, and it'd be obviously sort of fantastic. And I knew I could change the price down a little bit if there wasn't that much interest after a week or two. Or if I hadn't got photographs done, I knew I could advertise it, just get exposure out there online where tenants were looking, and know I could add my photographs 4 or 5 days later, for example. But now it's very different, because as soon as you put it on the market, it appears at the top of that first page of results, and therefore creating standout is very, very important. We have to get it right first time, because if we change the price after a few weeks, or we add photographs after a few weeks, it may have slipped onto that second page or even the third page of results. A useful statistic is that at Upad, we get on average a third of all of the inquiries for a property that we're advertising within the first 48 hours of a property being advertised. So it's really important that when you're putting a new property on, whether you're using Upad or anybody else, to put the effort in prior to sort of pressing go, as it were, and make sure you put your description in there, make sure it's punchy, and we'll come on to that in a second. You've got your photographs, it's on at a good price, and as far as you're concerned, from that due diligence of those alerts that we mentioned earlier, it will stand out compared to everything else on the market. So hopefully that makes sense. We'll ask some questions afterwards. Mr. Landlord, have you got anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to touch on the rental price bit. So many landlords, especially novice ones, they want to achieve the maximum amount, and they just ask so much money that they're just not going to get any interest. And it's when it's too late, when they've had a couple of weeks void period, maybe a month, and they're wondering why isn't anyone looking at my property even though it looks fantastic. It's because while it's really important to get the price right and not ask for over the odds, because the void period is going to cost you more than if you just lower your rate just a little bit more. Just lower it and you'll get a lot more inquiries.
It's a good point. There's one other school of thought, I'm not saying you should do this, but the idea that maybe you set your rent slightly below the market price, especially if it's in a very competitive space, will really put you in pole position. But by having the alerts coming through, you'll get a really good steer on how competitive it is and what you should be putting your property on the market for. So those are hopefully useful insights to consider at the time that you're putting your ad on. So, creating the perfect property ad. What's involved prior to sort of physically pressing the button and getting it on with that? And what I wanted us to do is before creating a perfect property ad, is I just wanted to sort of walk through the journey from a tenant's perspective, because I think it will give us some really good insights on how we should present our property and create that perfect ad before we put it on the market. And the one thing I just wanted to talk about briefly was just how tenants are searching for their next rental. And whilst there obviously has been a big shift online for tenants looking for their next rental, I wonder how much people are really aware about how much it has been driven online. And we're now at a point in the UK where 92% of tenants are all looking online for their next rental. Clearly that leaves 8%, if my maths are right, of tenants looking in classifieds, in newsagent shop windows, and high street estate agents looking for their next rental. So having a presence online is exceptionally important in today's marketplace. In terms of where, this slide shows where we get our inquiries from. Clearly Rightmove is the market leader. Zoopla's increased in market size as it's spent quite a lot in the market telling people they exist and merging with people like Property Finder and Find a Property. Gumtree is a bit of a love-hate site. Some people love it, some people don't want to go anywhere near it. Certainly if you're using Upad, you have the choice to not advertise your property on Gumtree even if you don't want to. But for those of you that are fans of Gumtree, we will bump your ad at least once a day or refresh it so it appears back at the top of the listing. And where I've written long tail, that's sort of about 1,000 odd individual property sites, newspaper websites, etc., where tenants are looking. But this is very much the makeup of where tenants are looking for their next rental. Did you want to say anything?
I was going to say, I've got mixed reviews about Gumtree. Like, it generates so many queries, but at the same time, there's so many scammers on there. So I just want to say, if you are using Gumtree and you are getting inquiries, make sure you should be doing it anyway, but do very thorough referencing, because from my experience, it's just Gumtree is just a haven for scammers. I don't know why it is. Maybe it's just easy to generate inquiries from there, but it just is.
Yeah, and indeed, there's this quality quantity aspect that is worth considering. Then moving on and just delving a bit deeper into all of this in terms of how tenants are looking for their next rental. One of the other biggest changes we've seen in tenant space is how they're looking for the next rental. There's been a 50% increase of tenants using mobile devices like iPads and iPhones to look for their next rental. And this has grown threefold in the last 12 months alone. And the reason I mention this in particular is because of the resolution on an iPad or a phone screen compared to using old-fashioned channels like newspapers. The resolution is sort of about 500 times more so on an iPad than it was in the local paper, and therefore it's really important to consider that on how your photos will look on an iPad, given that's the device that tenants are very much looking for their next rental. And then finally, one other thing just to sort of look at here is when tenants are looking for their next rental, and I mentioned this right at the beginning. Nearly 40% of all tenants are inquiring outside of office hours. It's no longer sort of the 9 a.m. lunchtime and 5:30 thing. It's very much moving outside of normal office hours and the weekend. So we need to react to that. And the bit I mentioned earlier is when tenants inquire, you need to speedily go back to them whilst they're in market, whilst they're looking for their next rental. So all of this means that presentation is very much crucial to finding your next tenant, and how you present your property will mean it stands out more than if you were otherwise not putting a particular amount of attention. And I mentioned earlier about photography, and we put a property up around Christmas time, and everything about it was exactly the same, except we did it without and with photographs. And I just thought it'd be interesting to do a poll of what effect you guys thought having photography meant compared to not in terms of tenant inquiries. If you want to select one of these three options, about twice as many inquiries, 4 times, or 8, that would be really, really helpful. It'd be good to get a steer on what people think on whether having photographs has an effect, and if so, how much so. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to select one of those 3 options and then hit the big submit button, which would be great. So let's see if we can go to the results. And just bring that up. So, my God, has everyone seen what the next slide is? Which is quite interesting. So let me just flick back to the presentation. Most of you are right there in the sense that 8 times more inquiries purely because you can see it. 3 things to mention on photography. Lead with an internal shot of your property. Tenants want to visualize what it's going to be like to be in your property. Really, as a definite no-go, is having an external shot of your property. People want to see what it's like on the inside. Have at least one photograph for each main room of the property, and maybe 8 to 12 photographs in total will probably suffice. I think if you can do that, that should give you the competitive edge over other properties that are being advertised. Having photography will massively increase the amount of inquiries. If you're using an iPad or a phone and using the Rightmove or Zoopla app within it, all you really see is that main photograph, and so without it, you're really putting yourself against everybody else. And it really also helps you in terms of cutting down on time wasters because people can see what your property is like. If you would like Upad to do photos for you, we will get a professional photographer to come round, and regardless where your property is or what size it is, we charge £85 plus VAT. Now, what also goes quite nicely with photos is having a floor plan. It's all very good seeing what it looks like, but knowing whether that third bedroom really is a bedroom, how big the kitchen is, whether you can fit a table for chairs in there, is also really helpful. And I suppose one thing that is worth mentioning here is we are finding tenants are increasingly doing their due diligence online. For those of you that were in London, Loot used to be very, very popular. Obviously, newspapers outside of London are still very popular. And it used to be the case as the paper came out, tenants would run around town to see as many places as they could and then make a decision. And what we're finding now is tenants are doing their due diligence online for the next rental rather than by physically seeing them all. And so it's really important to make sure you're putting as much about your property on as you possibly can rather than sort of, not showing it all per se. So floor plans are really, really important. And just moving on to the next slide. Floor plans will increase the amount of inquiries that you get by about 72%. And I actually think they're probably more useful if you've got an HMO or a studio because the range from them from one to the other is far more so than if it's a two-bed flat, for example. And if you would like us to do a floor plan for you, we charge £80 plus VAT. And again, you get to keep a copy like you would with the photos, and that's the same price regardless of where your property is or what size it is. And then finally, the other thing that would really help to maximize the amount of inquiries that you get is listing your property as a premium listing rather than a normal one. And this is very much about creating standout. And if from the alerts that we mentioned right at the beginning, you are in a competitive landscape, you've got many other properties that are similar to yours, this is how a normal property would look. You have one photo and 4 or 5 lines of text. But if you're in a competitive landscape, it may be worth considering advertising it as a premium listing, where clearly the background is different, there is more text that you can see, and most importantly, there's 3 photographs that you can see, which is very much what tenants are after. A statistic for you is that in the rental space, at the moment, only 1 in 10 properties is advertised looking like this. And given there are only 10 properties on a search result page, the likelihood of you advertising your property like this and being the only one on that page is exceptionally high. And therefore, if you've got 20, 30, 40 other properties that are in the competing area that you're in, it may be worth considering advertising yours as a premium listing to make it stand out further compared to all of the others. It will increase the amount of inquiries that you get quite dramatically. And I think for me, it's the bit about having 3 photographs, which very much focuses on what tenants want. And just the different background. It's surprising what a difference it makes as people are scrolling through a page of results. Mr. Landlord, do you want to have something to add on that?
Yeah, I just want to emphasise the importance of images. To me, it's like common sense, but if you go onto a website like Rightmove and you look at properties, there's still people putting up listings without an image, and it amazes me how they think they're going to generate inquiries to a decent level anyway. And if you're actually using a letting agent and they're letting you advertise without an image, to me, that's just a red flag and they're not doing their job. James, do you let
Totally.
landlords?
We wouldn't allow somebody to advertise a property if they didn't have photographs, because it's just not going to work. We have enough experience to say it's just not going to deliver. So it's an absolute necessity to have really good photographs. If you would like to advertise your property as a premium listing, we charge £75 plus VAT to advertise it as so on Rightmove. But it's only really relevant if you're in a competitive space. If you've only got one or two other properties, just get some really good photographs done, get a floor plan done, and maybe you only need to go this extra mile if you're in a competitive environment. So how do you choose the perfect tenants for your property? I am an absolute believer as a landlord to do my own viewings. And the reason I say this is if you were to ask a tenant face-to-face or over the phone what their take-home pay is, what would their existing landlord say about them, their response and their facial expressions and so on is worth 1,000 times more than what they would put on a form when they're being referenced. Now, I'm not saying don't reference them, but the idea of physically meeting people is so important, because it's all about getting the gut feel of meeting new tenants. And you know, what car they turn up in, is it full of Coke cans and crisp packets? All of these things, it's very hard to put your finger on what it means, but it's really important in my mind to help get a feel about whether you should take this person on or not. Something to add?
Yeah, I've written a blog post about this actually. I once did a tenant viewing, and my prospective tenant turned up, and for some reason I just noticed their fingernails, and it was filthy, and it made me feel physically sick. And I think how someone presents themselves physically during a viewing is really important, because it just gives you a sense of how they're going to treat your property. And if someone's coming to the property with dirty fingernails or whatever, and you notice it, or a bad smell, these are things that agents may not necessarily pass on to you because they just want to get the let as quick as possible. But as a landlord, you wouldn't want someone like that staying in your property, so that's something to bear in mind.
No, it's a good point. I think this whole bit about image and what people say when you ask them particular questions, how they present themselves, the car, all this sort of thing is really important to get an understanding of whether you should take this person on or not. So just to summarise what we've gone through, and I appreciate it's been quite quick, but we're trying to keep it within the sort of 30-minute time window. Understand the market that you operate in. Create an alert on Rightmove or Zoopla. These are tools that were originally for buyers and sellers, for buyers and tenants, but I think they're actually a very important tool for us as landlords to understand the space that we're operating in. Be aware that portals, in particular Rightmove, have got new functionality, so getting it right first time is an absolute must. The idea that you can add photographs after a few days or change the price after you put it on at a cheeky amount isn't something that's going to work for you anymore, and therefore put the effort in before you physically press that button. And image is everything. How you present your property will have a dramatic effect on the amount of inquiries that you get through. Tenants are increasingly using mobile devices to look for their next rental, which is no effect as far as we're concerned, other than how Rightmove and Zoopla apps operate. I mean, all they really see is that main photograph of the property. And because they're only doing it outside of office hours now, it's really important to react speedily to inquiries that you get through from tenants. And if you are using a high street agent, to mystery shop them to see how quickly they come back to you at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night and on the weekend while the tenant is in that zone looking for their next rental. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about tonight all leads into presentation. How you present your property online will have a dramatic effect on the amount of inquiries that you get from tenants and what void period you've got. And I don't think I can stress this enough, of the importance of having photos and a floor plan. I could talk literally for hours, which I won't, on why they are important and what effect they have. But it is one of the easiest things for us to look at to change when we're advertising a property. So it's really worth considering. And if you're in a competitive space, if your alerts are saying there's a lot of other properties in the same area, consider having a premium listing, which will really drive the amount of inquiries you get, mainly because so many other people aren't using a premium listing, and so it just drives the standout factor more so than if you were just advertising it like in a normal way. And just finally, get a gut feel of your new tenants. It's so important. Yes, it's important to fully reference the tenants and have a credit score and the previous landlord and the employer's reference, but the feel of meeting somebody, how they respond to the questions that you can ask them, how they dress, their fingernails, the car they turn up in, what state it's in, will have a really big effect on whether you should consider taking them on, and the gut feel factor should not be underestimated. So it's really, really important in my eyes that you do your own viewings rather than relying on a third party where possible. So we've got a little bit of time for some Q&As. There's been a few that have been coming in. Just on the property alerts, because I know we've been talking about that a bit, a couple of people have been talking about what parameters should I be setting up here. Now, when you create a search on Rightmove or Zoopla, you obviously choose the price range and the number of bedrooms. But one of the things when you put your postcode in is what range should you put in there. And I think this varies according to whether you're in a city area, urban area, or whether you're in a rural area like Wales, middle of Wales, for example. But in an urban area, I suggest that you do sort of a 1/4 mile radius. What you're trying to get out of this is to get a feel of what is happening in your locality. And if you find if you're just doing a 1/4 mile radius, there's only 1 or 2 properties that are coming up, just consider widening it to 1/2 mile perhaps, just so you get a steer of what is happening in your locality. The more rural a rental property is, the wider that you've got to operate. But I think generally a 1/4 mile radius should suffice, and obviously a bit more if you're in more rural areas. A couple of people are talking about On The Market. So onthemarket.com was a new portal that launched at the start of this year. And it was set up by a few high street agents that were frustrated with the fees that they were being charged by Rightmove and Zoopla and wanted to create an alternative to it. I am all in favour of creating an alternative site to increase choice amongst tenants. The most important thing from my perspective is will it be a vehicle that will speed up the lettings process for me as a landlord? And there's a couple of things to consider. They raised before they launched about £13 million in monies from investors, which is a significant amount of money. But just looking at Zoopla, they have spent approximately £8 million on marketing every year since they launched about 7 years ago to build up a market share of about 25% of the letting space, as I showed you on one of the slides earlier on today. So the idea that 13 million can cause disruption within the space and a sensible alternative to Rightmove and Zoopla, I cannot see happening. I cannot see tenants using On The Market compared to Rightmove and Zoopla in the near future in any way, shape or form. So if your agent happens to be using On The Market, fine, but one of the terms and conditions of using On The Market for an estate agent is that they have to give up using Rightmove or Zoopla. They can only go on one of those 2 sites. Now, given one of the slides I showed earlier, where Rightmove generates about 35% of all the inquiries we get, and Zoopla gets about 25%, that's a big chunk of inquiries that you won't be getting through as a customer. And that just means a longer let period, which is going to cost you. So those would be my key points to comment as far as that was concerned.
Yeah,
do you want something to add to that?
Some of you may have read it, but I wrote quite an elaborate post on this. I personally wouldn't recommend any landlord at this point in time to use an agent that doesn't use Rightmove and Zoopla. I just don't think On The Market will generate enough queries at this point to warrant their costs. So yeah, that's my tip. So make sure whatever agent you use, whether it's a high street or online agent, make sure they use at least Rightmove, but preferably Rightmove and Zoopla.
Yeah, that's a good point. A couple of people have just mentioned about pricing. Our pricing is very much based on charging fixed fees. We don't charge percentages, and we certainly do not charge any admin fees to tenants, which are a real turn-off when they're looking for a new property. If they see that there's a £200–300 to pay to secure that property on top of the rent and the deposit, it is a real turn-off. I can't stress that enough when people are looking for their next rental. It's really, really important. I had the prices for things like photos and floor plans on there. For those of you that are members of Property Investor Project, which clearly you all are because this was only promoted to your base, If you go to that web link that is on your screen now of upad.co.uk PIP, you can get a £40 discount voucher for your first transaction with us, which means instead of paying the normal £99 plus VAT, it's only £59 plus VAT. And then you get your ALA qualified account manager who is here from 8 till 8 during the week and 9 to 4 on the weekends. You get exposure across all the major property sites like Rightmove, Zoopla and Gumtree if you would like. And we are very much here to help you in the journey rather than you put everything on and then we leave you. The guys in the office are here to help you let it as speedily as you can. It's in our interest too to get your place let as speedily as we possibly can. A couple of people are just asking about what differences we have compared to your traditional high street agent, and I suppose just to sort of list some of them off in no particular order, and the reason I'm going to say these ones is because of how tenants have changed in their behaviours in recent years, and that is why these things are important. In no particular order, I mentioned earlier that there's people in the office that are ALA accredited to help you in the journey as a landlord, that customer support from your perspective. But from a tenant's perspective, when they inquire through Rightmove or Zoopla, we reply back to them speedily. And by speedily, I mean within about 90 seconds if they're filling out the Rightmove form or the Zoopla form, whilst they're in that zone of looking for their next rental. If they call us, which about a third of all tenants do, we answer the phone. We will tell them that the landlord is doing the viewings and what their contact details are, and we do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's a human side of it, and there's an automated option if people want to go down that particular road. But it's very important to reply to inquiries speedily because, I suppose, think about your behaviour when you're renewing your insurance. You sort of want to get 2 or 3 quotes from people and then you make a decision. And you'd like to try and get the whole thing done within an hour and move on because it's a bit of a pain. Tenants are very much doing a similar thing where they're wanting to get 2 or 3 viewings in their diary for the next couple of days. And to make sure yours is one of those 2 or 3, it's important that your agent and indeed you reply speedily to those inquiries rather than waiting to the next point in time. I think the other bit is that we put a lot of due diligence into putting a property on the market, no pun there, but we put a lot of due diligence in before we will physically put a property on the market, and we will really help you maximise the amount of inquiries that you get. So we're here to help you, and we will phone you regardless about how we can make your property stand out over all the others. There's a lot of insights that we have, there's a lot of data that we have coming into the office that we get, and we will work with you to make sure that that is the case, rather than just putting a property on in the same way as you would with Gumtree, for example. And we don't charge admin fees, and I'm just going to keep this quite succinct as far as 3 key benefits. Pretty much everybody else out there charges admin fees to tenants, and I can't tell you enough what a turn-off it is from a tenant who already has to find 6, increasingly 8 weeks deposit monies, pay the first month's rent, and then to be told there's £200 or £300 of admin fees on top of that. It is such a turn-off for tenants. It's really, really important in my mind not to use somebody that has a lot of admin fees. And there was one town in particular, I think it was Bristol, Bristol, increasingly are offering a service to landlords where it's 0% agency fees. So everybody's like jumping at the bit about it all. But what very few people are picking up on is they've passed the cost onto the tenant and are now charging them really high fees for securing a property. And it may be free to the landlord, but it means their void period has increased dramatically, which has actually cost them more than it otherwise would be. Something you want to add to that?
You pretty much covered it. I just wanted to say, make sure you find out, whether you use a high street agent or online agent, find out, it's really important to find out what fees are actually charging the tenant as well, not just your own fees, because as James just covered, what they charge the tenants will reflect on the inquiry rate. So if they're charging too much to the tenant, the inquiries are going to just plummet. So it's really important to ask those questions, not just about your fees, but the tenants as well. And also another big one about online agents, they don't charge tenancy renewal fees, which is something I hate with a passion. So that's another pro for online agents as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's just an unnecessary cost as far as I'm concerned, and it's just people having a a pop at vulnerable people as far as I'm concerned. I think we've got time for one more question. And there's a few comments about getting tenancy agreements done and deposits and so on. So we have a package. It's called the Essential Package, which consists of us advertising your property and doing all the paperwork. By paperwork, I mean getting the tenancy agreement done, registering the deposit, and getting the standing order mandate set up for the rent. Those are the sort of crucial parts of it all. It's very much an online solution, but two key things to think about. The first is that there are humans here to speak to. So if there are particular clauses you want in or out, whether it's to do with pets or break clauses, or the property needs to be cleaned from time to time, you can add or remove those particular things, and we will work with you to ensure that the tenancy agreement matches what you're after, rather than it just being a template. We want it to sort of still work for you, very much so. As far as referencing tenants and getting the tenancy agreement done, a lot of that is done online, and we have quite a slick process in place for facilitating that, which actually, as I mentioned right at the beginning of this webinar, there was somebody that was taken on by a landlord for a property they saw last night. They came through to us at about 10 o'clock-ish this morning, and we got the whole process done in terms of all the referencing, all the paperwork done, monies received, tenancy agreement done by about 4 o'clock this afternoon. And whilst it's a bit rare that it's as fast as that, that is very much how the world is moving, and we react to that by making it a very slick solution for landlords to operate, rather than pieces of paper being passed around or being left to you. So I suppose in essence, you choose what bits of the puzzle you would like us to do. If you just want us to advertise your property instead of using a traditional agent, or you want us to do the paperwork and get photographs done, you choose what you would like, rather than having to pay for the whole bundle, which was a frustration of mine as a landlord when I was using your traditional high street agents. So thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Sorry we couldn't answer all of the questions. There will be an email that you will get shortly. So if there's anybody else you know that would be interested in this, you can put their contact details in. And we will send them a link to this webinar. If there's any of it that you've missed, you'll get a copy so you can watch it again tomorrow or when you would like. And most importantly, there is a feedback, which we would really appreciate any feedback you've got on how we can improve this going forward. This is the first one Property Investor Project have ever done, and there was a fair amount of nervousness about how it would go and whether people would be interested. And we seem to have had quite a lot of people that have taken the trouble of listening on a Wednesday evening, so thank you very much indeed. But anything else you'd like us to cover off in future, or anything we can improve on, that would be very much appreciated. Anything you want to add to that?
I just want to say thanks to everyone for listening. It's very much appreciated. And please leave a comment on my blog on whether you found this useful or not, and if there's any particular topics you'd like me to cover or James to cover, or if you thought James was rubbish, I'll get someone else to replace him. That's not a problem.
You're not allowed to use the gift card and say I'm rubbish. That's unfair. Thank you so much for listening. Really, really appreciate it. I will let everybody go off and have their dinners. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to do this webinar to you. And I hope there were useful bits of information that made it worthwhile from your perspective. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.